Assalamu alaikum, Bitcoin Mena. Today, I'm going to be sharing a topic that is near and dear to my heart on achieving peace in the Middle East, from proof of weapons to proof of work. If we haven't met already, my name is Simon Dixon. I wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin in 2011, spoke at the first Bitcoin conference in Europe when the price of Bitcoin crashed from $30 to $3. I founded a company called Bank to the Future, and we essentially funded many of the largest companies in Bitcoin, from Coinbase, from Kraken, Bitfinex, Circle, Robinhood, Blockchain.com, and many others, Exodus as well. I've been a part of the anti-war movement. The first podcast I gave was called On the Bitcoin Not Bombs podcast, and also part of the monetary reform movement. I've been sharing this concept of proof of weapons. It is really obviously came from the concept of proof of work. And I'd like to share it with you briefly. And then I'm going to go through how this relates to achieving peace in the Middle East, and a very important message around crypto versus Bitcoin and the radically different direction that this could go based upon current research and the current geopolitical environment. So let's dive right in. So what is the proof of weapons network? So it was a term that I coined in order to help people understand how fiat currency works. It's backed by weaponizing various factions of power. You have the financial industrial complex, whether that be the large asset managers, the investment bank, the retail banks that create fiat currency every time they issue a loan, the private equity industry, the venture capital industry. It creates a complex which is able to weaponize finance in order to subordinate countries through organizations like the IMF, corporations through public companies, through the equity capital markets and the debt capital markets, and also individuals through bank loans, whether that be student loans, auto loans, or mortgages are the most common. That's the financial industrial complex. We also have a technical industrial complex. These are essentially the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, the surveillance, the digital IDs, everything that is being built within these large monopolies that are building vast data centers and different types of technologies, you know, whether that be the Googles, the Amazons, the Baidus, and everything else. You also have the military industrial complex. You know, this is the Lockheed Martins, the General Dynamics, the Raytheons, which, are originally, manufacturing weaponry, but also more recently, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And many of these factions of power have crossed over. Now, we are in a radically changing time, and the Middle East is really in the center of that, because we've been in this post-World War II Bretton Woods world order, which set the monetary policy and the fiat currency model that came from the British Empire and was handed over to the American Empire, from the Bank of England over to the Federal Reserve. But recently, things have changed. Trump administration 1.0 made America energy independent. That now means that rather than needing energy, oil, and liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the Middle East, America is now a competitor to the Gulf countries. And the Gulf countries have unified around the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. And the biggest customer of the GCC now is not selling oil and energy to America. It is selling energy and oil to China. And so we have had a radically, changing time based upon these energy dynamics. And in the proof of weapons network, where energy flows, change comes. And I'm not sure whether most people have thought about this. And that has led to a radically changing geopolitical environment, while historically, the proof of weapons network has used the forever war model to destabilize the Middle East, and using divide and conquer strategies has been able to stop the Middle East unifying around their resources and entering into relative stability. And that's not been the case ever since, the Sykes-Picot split, when the British Empire and the French Empire split up the Middle East, and then it moved over to the American Empire and the post-Bretton Woods II model that culminated in the petrodollar. But now we have hit this phase. Now, because we have had a rising power to the east, which is China, and the Gulf countries has cooperated with regional blocs in the east, BRICS, we had normalization through China between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which have always been on the other sides of divide and conquer strategies. Now, this has always been military industrial complex aligned destabilization campaigns. And obviously, Israel has been the center of that as a US ally and somebody that is aligned with the US military industrial complex in propagating this forever war model. But what has changed now is that essentially through these military industrial complex forever wars that have backed up the dollar and the proof of weapons network, it created an alternative power that came from the Federal Reserve in the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And those shareholders, of course, are the banks. The banks created investment banks and obviously the investment asset management industry as well. But in this change, the financial industrial complex has aligned with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the GCC. Why has that happened? Well, because if you look at every co-investment deal that's happening right now, it is essentially the financial industrial complex, let's call them the FIC, and the GCC. Because the GCC, using their energy, build up vast sovereign wealth. And that has changed the order. And we are going through this radical change as we speak, which brings a very interesting partnership that emerged that I'd like to understand in determining how to achieve peace in the Middle East when we transition from proof of weapons to proof of work. Well, the financial industrial complex and the technical industrial complex has emerged into integrating into a multipolar world order. You'll notice that global finance is strategically weakening the dollar when you look at all the different trends right now, because the biggest push towards multipolarity is not just China and BRICS, it's actually the Western FIC, the financial industrial complex. And you can see that in breaking the petrodollar, breaking the eurodollar, and breaking the Japan carry trade. These are all major campaigns to strategically weaken the dollar, change capital outflows. And I believe that this is because America is now subordinate to the FIC, and the FIC has partnered with the GCC in negotiating regional stability. And so this is really the one piece of research that came out just this week that I'd like to share that kind of goes along with my theory is that media is also weaponized by this proof of weapons network. And there was a media piece that recently came out, and it was by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Now, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is historically funded by Rockefeller's financial industrial complex key nodes. But what was the advice and guidance? Now, this is US financial industrial complex funded think tanks, which set policy through their publications. It was recommending that the GCC should build digital asset rails that are compatible with BRICS. So it's asking the GCC to focus on its technical integration into BRICS. Now, as I said, the Carnegie, any of these think tanks, they're deeply integrated into the FIC. This is the banks, this is funds, this is kind of technical led as well. So into the TICs, whether it be AI, digital ID, data centers, surveillance, all the different things that are part of the tick agendas right now. And so when a US bank tells the GCC to build into multipolar systems and to align their economies with China, Russia, and BRICS in a multipolar world, and they suggest that the tool for doing that is non-dollar denominated stablecoins, this is an indication that the FIC is actually actively pushing the world towards this multipolarity and changing the capital flows. And this is a real change in the monetary order that we are witnessing right now. So what happens with the financial industrial complex? So historically, the FIC profits from both sides of a war, whether it's regional stability or whether it is the forever war model. And so in both sides, they can profit because you have the forever war, which requires financing, and the rebuild, which requires financing, and an integration with the technical industrial complex. And so historically, the Middle East has always been on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network. But I believe now the military industrial complex is negotiating its exit and is being led by the financial industrial complex. And this is because the FIC is essentially found that the profits from the rebuild and technical integration is much greater than continuing the forever war model, which is why we're seeing radical change at the moment. That's happening because Gulf sovereign wealth have essentially been negotiating these deals. There's been, negotiations of energy routes, and this is all because there was normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and all of these different trade corridors as a result of BRICS are being unlocked and moving the world to regional stability. So, historically, the model has been that the technical industrial complex in these negotiations can embed themselves through what we're seeing now, which is artificial intelligence governance, digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, programmable finance, and really data-driven infrastructure as a result of this crypto trends that are emerging. Now, the GCC must essentially own their own data centers. And we're seeing that because when the Gulf countries have been investing in the West and purchasing assets within America, it has been doing foreign direct investment. So when the Gulf countries are investing in America, when, recently Saudi came to the White House and said, we'll invest $1 trillion, it was followed up by NVIDIA agreeing to build data centers across the Middle East and give access to chips. And this is what foreign direct investment is. It's like a reversal of the IMF model. The IMF has been subordinating the Middle East historically. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been rebuilding, and the Gulf countries are using their sovereign wealth funds. And so you've got the purchasing of assets in America at the same time as the GCC and America both being energy and gas exporters. And so really, this is the leverage that I believe the FIC has been pushing, and why we're getting this, MIC proxy Israel and the instability campaigns coming towards an end. What I think we're seeing from here is that proof of weapons network, if they could get their way, they'd go through 3 cycles, which is the military, the MIC in basically manufactures instability. But now the FIC and the TIC profit from the rebuild, and they're pushing through this Carnegie type of consultation and think tanks that the Gulf countries should be focused on tokenization, artificial intelligence, identity system, digital rails, stablecoins, and central bank digital currency. Because in the third phase, nations either become dependent or independent unless they do it with their own data centers and their own infrastructure. And this is what I believe that we're witnessing right now. So tokenization kind of appears in many of the rebuild plans that we're looking at. I studied the Gaza rebuild plan. Now, on the financial industrial complex side, it was talking about deep integration and tokenization as the proposal. Now, Trump came along and put together the 20-point plan that was the 21-point plan. But the original plan was really about tokenization, which gives soft forms of digital colonization. But the GCC have been fighting back with hosting the data centers in order to remain sovereign. And I believe this is the tension that we're witnessing right now. Now, what I want to point out as the final part of this presentation, that it is in building Bitcoin strategic reserves and utilizing energy that you're able to combat some of this crypto tokenization and really digital colonization. And this is where I think people should really be focused in terms of countries. Because if you are a country that is recovering from a war zone, which I believe we will be seeing in Gaza, because Saudi said that there is going to be no Abraham Accords or normalization with Israel unless there is a Palestinian state, then I believe many of those rails are being built right now. And as long as they remain on their own data centers, as well as understanding some of this crypto infrastructure, then countries are able to take some of these negotiated cash flows in the rebuild and make sure that they are tied to Bitcoin sovereign wealth funds for each of the countries. And it is being able to have cash flows connected to Bitcoin sovereign wealth that we're able to ensure that these countries are able to reverse colonize rather than being subordinate. Now, Bitcoin obviously encompasses energy and energy revenues and cash flows, remittances, and some of the diaspora wealth that comes back in. This really comes into either a crypto play or a Bitcoin play. And I put it to you that Bitcoin is the only mechanism for providing the monetary sovereignty in order to really usher in this prosperity that can be built. So all of the war-torn countries, they can use sovereign Bitcoin wealth, and they can have their own independent FIC and TIC rails rather than falling for what is being recommended, which is the subordination through digital infrastructure. This gives the countries the ability to eventually, as Bitcoin is a fixed supply, escape some of the debt traps, increase the economic base so that it cannot be weaponized against them through some of these digital rails. And Bitcoin is the only way to have full digital autonomy within a sovereign wealth structure during these reconstruction phases, because Bitcoin versus crypto is essentially the next 30 years that will determine whether these are subordinate structures for the financial industrial complex and the technical industrial complex, and we have neo-colonialism through digital rails, or there is sovereign wealth, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply. They can own it in self-custody, and as long as they own it in self-custody, it allows them to build that sovereign wealth and use it as a national resistance in negotiating away from, these colonization, military-industrial complex, and free themselves from the proof of weapons network in these post-reconstructing rebuilding. Crypto, central bank digital currencies, tokenized assets, if they are not set up correctly, they could be a tool for subordination. They're programmable. They can be, shaped based upon foreign interference. and it can be built for surveillance and compliance based upon foreign data centers. This is why I believe that we're seeing this enhanced negotiations right now, because this alliance between the FIC and the TIC and the GCC is ensuring that the data centers, and that is the asset of the future, connected to energy, is what we're seeing right now. And so you can either increase dependency through crypto rails, and crypto plus AI is essentially institutional power, or you can use Bitcoin for national sovereignty. And I believe that we are witnessing the end of the US-Israel destabilization campaign and model, and this is going to be moving over to independent sovereign data centers, Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin strategic reserves. And so stability is really dependent upon getting this crypto versus Bitcoin right and getting these negotiations right, because the GCC needs to host the infrastructure. I think that the foreign direct investment needs to put the cash flows into these sovereign wealth funds. And if you're Gaza, if you're Syria, if you're Iraq, you're Lebanon, you're Yemen, then all of the rebuilding needs to be done with Gulf investment. It will involve some FIC, co-investment, but the Bitcoin Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserves is the only path to a sovereign and really changing this. I think we're going to see the announcement of Saudi nuclear energy programs. I believe that because Iran and UAE and Egypt have also joined the BRICS corridors, and because China is going through this normalization phase that we're witnessing right now, currency competition and currency war is going to be what we're seeing. And the more and more we see as we move away from currency competition, away from global hegemon and US dollar dominance, the Middle East can essentially sit between these regional powers of China, regional sovereignty with BRICS, and America that is moving more towards a regional power. And Bitcoin sovereign wealth and Bitcoin strategic reserves, combined with Bitcoin mining, artificial intelligence data centers, cheap energy, tax neutrality, is really the opportunity of a lifetime to sit between these powers. And I think that's going to have a knock-on effect on the global south, on the MENA, on the Middle Eastern, North African rails. And I think that Bitcoin will thrive in multipolarity, which will be supporting those Bitcoin strategic reserves in this era. And so that is what I want to leave you with. And that is how proof of weapons can transition to proof of work. And we can usher in an era of regional stability in the Middle East, where everybody in this multipolar world is using their own currencies, and Bitcoin becomes the strategic multipolar world asset of the future. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be here in person. I wanted to be, but unfortunately I had some family things to attend to. And I will see you, and I hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.